In the dusty outskirts of Wexford County, buried between miles of overgrown farmland and rusted railroad lines, sat a place few talked about and fewer had seen: Hawthorne Penitentiary, a concrete fortress where time didn't just stand still, it withered. Opened in 1963 and expanded in quiet secrecy through the 80s, it was the kind of prison that never made the news. No riots, no escapes, no visitors. But everyone in the county knew someone who worked there, and everyone feared the man who ran it. Warden Silas Granger, 59 years old, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, always in uniform. For over 3 decades, he had ruled Hawthorne like a kingdom of silence. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He just looked, and people obeyed. Inmates called him Father Granger. Guards called him Sir. No one ever called him Silas. His record was clean, his prison was quiet, and his staff unfailingly loyal, especially the women. Hawthorne was known for its unusually high number of female correctional officers, a policy Granger had personally pushed during the early 2000s. Women bring calm, he'd say, and calm brings control. But beneath that logic was something less visible, a dynamic few dared question. At first no one thought it strange. The female guards admired him. He was protective, respectful, soft-spoken. He remembered birthdays, asked about sick mothers, stayed late, gave second chances. And when he offered promotions, no one ever said no. Then came the rumors, quiet ones, whispers in break rooms, a long hug seen after hours, a female guard spotted leaving the administrative wing at midnight. But Hawthorne was a world unto itself, where the walls weren't just physical, they were cultural. You didn't speak out, you didn't challenge the order, and you sure as hell didn't question the warden. Until one day in early spring, when a rookie nurse, barely 3 weeks on the job, filed a routine report to the state medical board. 6 women, all staff, all between 24 and 34, all visibly pregnant, all due within months of each other, and all refusing to list the father. The report wasn't an accusation, just an anomaly, a footnote. But in the state's Department of Corrections, footnotes have a way of making people nervous. A week later, a file landed quietly on the desk of Internal Affairs Officer Mason Laurel, 47, known for 2 things: discretion and a remarkable ability to leave no paper trail. His assignment was simple: evaluate morale and ethics at Hawthorne Penitentiary. But attached to the envelope, scrawled in pen by an anonymous hand, were 4 words: do not pursue this. He was instructed to take no official interviews, no cameras, no badges, just observe. Laurel was no fool. He'd been in this game long enough to know that when a warden is loved by both the board and the budget, you tread lightly. So he drove out to Wexford County. Quiet roads, sparse trees, an overcast sky that hung like a curtain. And when he saw the prison for the first time, that slab of stone and wire looming over the landscape, something in his gut turned cold. It was too quiet. The guards greeted him respectfully. Granger himself met him at the gate, all charm and calm authority. "We like things simple here," the warden said with a smile. "No drama, no headlines, just order." Mason nodded. "That's why I'm here, Warden. Just a routine visit." Inside the walls, everything appeared normal. Cells were clean, inmates well-behaved, schedules tight. But Mason noticed something. The eyes. The men looked empty, not rebellious, not angry, just drained, like years of silence had hollowed them out. And the women, especially the guards, they looked exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. And when he'd passed them in the hallway, their smiles seemed tight, practiced. On the second day of his visit, he met Officer Lena Moore, 31, 5 months pregnant. She moved slowly, but with precision. She'd been at Hawthorne for 7 years. "How's the job treating you?" Mason asked casually. She paused. Her hand drifted to her stomach. "It's stable," she said. "And the warden?" She gave a strange smile. "He's protective." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Protective how?" Lena just looked down at her clipboard and said, "You'll figure it out." It wasn't long before he started hearing things. Never directly, never from the same mouth twice. But the story began to take shape. There had been relationships, consensual ones, according to the few brave enough to say anything. Promotions offered quietly. emotional manipulation cloaked as mentorship, promises whispered during late-night rounds, and now, 6 women, all pregnant, none willing to talk, and a staff that protected the warden like a beloved father figure. Even the inmates seemed complicit. One, an old-timer named Ray, said to Mason in passing, "Granger ain't just the warden, he owns this place, and everybody in it." Back in his motel room, Mason reviewed his notes. There was enough to trigger an inquiry, maybe even a formal investigation. But every time he drafted a report, he stopped. Because he knew it would go nowhere. Granger had friends in high places. The kind of friends who built careers on low-incident prisons and spotless financial audits. A scandal at Hawthorne? It wouldn't just take down the warden, it would blow open the whole system, and nobody wanted that. So the orders stayed the same. Observe, say nothing. But Mason had seen enough, and deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. By the 3rd week of Mason Laurel's stay, patterns began to emerge, not through official channels, but through silence, routines, and the looks people exchanged in the empty space between words. The first woman he truly noticed was Officer Dana Holt, 29, athletic build, hair tied back so tight it seemed like armor. She rarely spoke, except when absolutely required, but Mason saw how the others watched her, some with pity, some with restraint. Like she'd already crossed a line no one else dared name. Dana was 6 months pregnant. She didn't take leave. She didn't slow down. She worked night shifts, stood post in solitary, and walked the perimeter twice a day. "Doesn't look tired," one male guard whispered in the break room. "She's made of steel." "She doesn't sleep," someone else muttered. "She doesn't want to." By now, Mason knew of 6 women: Holt, Moore, Jansen, Reyes, Coulter, and Maddox. Different ages, different tenures, same outcome, same silence. He had confirmed that none were married. None had reported partners to the department. None had filed sexual harassment claims. But all were pregnant, and all still working. That's when he noticed the cameras, or rather, the lack of them. In most state facilities, cameras are like wallpaper. In every corridor, every entry point, every break room. But at Hawthorne, large swaths of footage were missing. Entire wings, especially administrative and residential quarters, were dark. Mason asked the IT technician, a young man named Ellis, about the blind spots. Ellis hesitated. "Warden said it keeps the women comfortable. Less surveillance in break areas and locker rooms." "That makes sense," Mason replied, writing the note in his journal. But it didn't explain why the main hallway near the warden's office had no footage from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. every night, nor why server backups were cleared every 72 hours. In a place built on control, the lack of evidence was the strongest evidence of all. Then came the locker key. It was left for Mason in his motel mailbox, sealed in a plain envelope. No note, just a small brass key labeled C-Wing 12. He returned to the prison at dawn, said he was following up on routine security maintenance, and entered the women's locker area in C-Wing. Inside locker numbers 12, tucked behind a tattered uniform, was a Ziploc bag containing 3 pregnancy tests, all positive, and a folded piece of paper. It read, "He tells us he loves us, that we're helping build something real. But he says if we speak, we ruin it all. He says no one will believe us anyway. No name, no handwriting match. Just truth, sitting in a locker like a ticking clock." Mason took a photo and left everything as it was. He knew better than to remove the evidence. He knew someone was watching. The next day, he arranged a casual conversation with Officer Reyes, a calm, soft-voiced woman in her early 30s. 5 months pregnant, but barely showing. They met in the staff kitchen over instant coffee and lemon bars. "You've been here how long?" Mason asked. 11 years, she replied. "And the warden? What kind of man is he?" She looked up. "Strong. Respected? Very. Loved?" Her spoon clinked in the cup. "Sometimes people confuse love with safety." "What does that mean?" Reyes didn't answer. She just got up and left the room. Later that afternoon, while reviewing inmate intake logs in the control tower, Mason overheard an exchange over the radio. "Unit 5 to Central. Officer Coulter is requesting early departure." Nausea. Copy. She's 5 months, right? 5.5. Says it's hitting harder this week. Noted. Warden says to authorize. That phrase, Warden says to authorize, kept echoing in Mason's mind. There were protocols, pregnancy accommodations, sick leave forms, temporary reassignments. None of those were being followed. Everything, from shift changes to medical adjustments, passed through Granger alone, as if the women weren't just employees. They were his responsibility, or his creation. That night, Mason walked the yard. Cold wind, the kind that made steel fences rattle. He passed inmate Ray again, the old man who never stopped watching. You ever wonder why nobody escapes from here? Ray asked. Mason shrugged. Good fences? Ray chuckled. Nah, it's 'cause nobody's looking to run. You either disappear into the walls or become part of the story. What story? Ray looked toward the warden's quarters, far above the yard, lights glowing through narrow windows. The story where power don't wear a badge, it wears a smile. That evening, Mason filed a secret report. Encrypted, unsigned, buried inside a private USB drive he hid in the lining of his coat. He didn't name names, didn't accuse. He just wrote one line. There are 6 women, all pregnant, all silent, and the warden holds every answer. He knew if he filed it officially, it would vanish. But he also knew stories like this never stayed buried. Not forever, not when the babies started showing, not when one of them, sooner or later, was bound to speak. And so, as the days passed, Mason stopped asking questions. He just started watching more closely, because somewhere in the silence of that prison, truth was clawing its way toward the surface, and he would be there when it finally broke through. The following week, Mason Laurel received a message from the Department of Corrections. Not a call, not an email. A hand-delivered envelope left at the prison front desk by an unmarked courier. Inside was a single sentence typed in all caps. You are not to initiate any formal inquiry or interviews with staff. This is a closed monitoring case. Return to reporting Format 72C. It was a shutdown, a quiet muzzle. Format 72C meant observe and log daily operations without direct involvement. It was a tool the department used when they wanted someone inside but not digging. Mason read the note twice, then folded it into his jacket pocket without a word. He'd seen this tactic before. When someone high enough wanted to protect someone even higher. When optics mattered more than truth. But it wasn't just silence from the top now. It was complicity. That night, Warden Granger invited Mason to dinner in his private quarters. It was the first time Mason had been allowed inside the old residential wing of the prison and area that used to house senior guards in the 70s but had since become the warden's personal domain. The space was immaculate. Wooden furniture polished like glass. Books on psychology and prison architecture lined the shelves. A black and white photo of a younger Granger with state officials hung near the door. He poured Mason a glass of bourbon. You're from Raleigh, right? The warden asked, calm as ever. Yes, Mason replied. You got kids? No. Granger nodded slowly, sipping his drink. Kids change everything, he said. You start seeing the world differently. You stop worrying about rules. You start worrying about survival. Mason didn't answer. Granger smiled. I know why you're here. I know what they're whispering. But this place, it's not the world out there. This place runs because it's protected. You understand? Mason's jaw clenched. Granger leaned forward slightly. Don't make a mess that no one wants to clean up. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a warning. It was a reminder that power, real power, doesn't need to raise its voice. Mason left without finishing his drink. And for the first time since arriving, he felt truly afraid. The next day, something shifted. Officer Kendra Maddox, one of the pregnant guards, approached him quietly during lunch in the courtyard. She was young, 25, with soft features and deep eyes that always seemed on the verge of saying something. She sat down across from him and asked, Can I trust you? Mason didn't move. What do you mean? She looked over her shoulder. No one was watching. I didn't want to talk, she said, voice barely above a whisper. but I'm not sleeping. I'm scared all the time, and no one is listening." She slid a folded paper napkin across the table. Mason opened it slowly. Inside was a sketch, crude, done with a pencil, of what looked like the warden's office. Arrows pointed to a cabinet, a bookshelf, and a locked drawer. "He writes everything down," she said. "Who he sees, when, what's said. He keeps it like some kind of diary." "Why are you telling me this now?" Mason asked. Her voice cracked. "Because I didn't say yes." The silence between them deepened. "I thought I had to," she said. "He made it sound like love, like purpose. He said this place was dying and we were chosen, that we'd be remembered." Mason's chest tightened. "He doesn't hurt you physically?" he asked carefully. Kendra shook her head. "No, it's not like that. It's not about pain. It's about surrender." That word sat like a stone in Mason's gut. He knew this wasn't just abuse, it was ideology, a belief system built inside concrete walls, where the line between devotion and manipulation blurred until nobody could tell the difference, or was too afraid to try. Kendra looked him in the eye. "I don't want to raise this baby in silence," she said. Mason nodded. "I'll find a way." That night, Mason went back to the admin wing. He timed his movement to coincide with the shift change, when cameras were rotated and patrols were loose. The door to Granger's office was locked. He'd expected that. But the maintenance panel above the hallway ceiling, the one he had marked earlier, was not. He climbed through the narrow crawl space, dropped into the darkened office, and went straight for the bookshelf. Behind a row of criminal justice textbooks, he found it, a worn leather-bound ledger, no title, no markings. Inside, dozens of pages filled with names, dates, annotations. Dana, calm, resilient, believes in the mission. Reyes, slow to trust, show her gratitude, let her lead. Kendra, fragile, loyal when given purpose. Each name was followed by symbols, numbers, calendars, even notes on when they were most emotionally vulnerable. It wasn't a record. It was a doctrine. Mason took photos of every page. Quiet, quick, then slipped the book back into place. When he climbed back out and returned to his quarters, his hands were shaking. Because this wasn't just 6 women. It was a pattern, a system, a prison built not from steel and stone, but from minds broken slowly, gently, over time. And the worst part? They still called it love. 3 days passed. Mason Laurel continued his routine like nothing had changed. He logged operations reports, sat quietly in staff meetings, walked the perimeter, observed shift turnover. He was the same man, the same eyes, the same silence. But now, he wasn't watching for patterns. He was watching for cracks, and the prison was beginning to split. You could see it in how the guards spoke to each other, shorter conversations, eyes darting to security cameras, whispered apologies followed by sudden exits. Kendra Maddox had said more than she realized. The women may not have spoken openly, but they could feel something shifting in the air. It started with Dana Holt. Mason noticed she'd stopped looking Granger in the eye. She avoided standing near him. Whenever he gave instructions, she nodded with robotic precision, but her eyes stayed elsewhere. Then one morning during lineup, Granger addressed the staff. "All of you are doing excellent work," he said. "We are a family. We don't let outside noise distract us from what matters: loyalty, order, and care for one another." The speech wasn't long, but every word dripped with warning. As the group dispersed, Mason saw Dana pause near the exit. Her hand rested on her pregnant belly. And for just a second, she looked directly at him. Not long after, she requested a transfer to a different facility. Granger denied it. That same night, Mason met Kendra again, this time in the medical wing. She was cleaning up supplies, pretending to restock vitamins, but her hands were trembling. "They're watching me," she whispered. "Since I talked to you, they've changed my shift. I'm not allowed near C-Wing alone." "Who changed it?" Mason asked, though he already knew. "Granger, through Coulter. Everything runs through her now. Officer Coulter, one of the 6, strong, disciplined, a quiet enforcer of Granger's will. She'd been at Hawthorne nearly as long as Granger himself. If the warden had a loyalist, it was her. She was like a sister, Kendra said. Now, she looks at me like I betrayed something sacred. Mason leaned closer. You did the right thing, but you can't be the only one. Kendra wiped her eyes. I'm scared, but I can't go back. I'm pregnant. I don't even know who I am anymore. Her voice cracked. I believed him. I believed all of it. Mason wanted to say something, anything. But the truth was, even now, he wasn't sure who the villain was. Was it coercion? Cultish manipulation? A perverted form of consent built on emotional dependence? Whatever it was deeper than paperwork could explain. Then came the envelope, slipped under Mason's motel door at dawn, no return address. Inside were 5 photos, security camera stills, grainy and dark, but clear enough. All of them showed late-night meetings between Granger and each of the pregnant women hallways, stairwells, closed-door conversations. Nothing explicit, but damning in context. On the back of the last photo was a sentence written in pencil. Ask her about the interview room. No signature, no clue, but Mason knew who her meant. That afternoon, Mason requested a wellness check on Officer Lena Moore. Officially, it was a non-invasive mental health screening state protocol after month 5 of pregnancy. Informal. Private. They met in a small office near the visitation wing. 1 camera, 1 door. Lena sat stiffly, arms folded over her stomach. You don't have to talk, Mason said. I just want to know you're okay. She hesitated. Then, why now? Because you matter. Because something happened. And no one should carry it alone. Lena stared at him. And then, finally, she spoke. It was in the interview room, she said, voice brittle. Late shift, lights off, no cameras in there. He told me it was sacred, that nothing outside those walls mattered, that I'd been chosen. Her hands trembled. He kissed my hand first, said I was part of something historic, that our children would be Hawthorne's future. And then he said, the others had already agreed. Mason leaned forward. Did you say yes? She swallowed. I said I didn't know. And then? He told me silence was agreement. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I just shut off. I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want to be alone. Her voice dropped. I was never the same after that. Mason left the room slowly, every step heavier than the last. He had the photos, the ledger notes, Lena's statement, Kendra's trust. The entire invisible structure of abuse laid bare. But still, no case number, no formal inquiry, no official investigation. Because the department didn't want one. Because if Hawthorne fell, the whole system would start cracking. Mason stood in the prison yard that evening, watching the sun sink behind the wire fences. And he thought, how many more? How many institutions hid their rot beneath concrete and silence? How many people had been told that obedience was loyalty and that survival was love? Later that night, Mason made a call. Not to internal affairs, not to the department, but to someone he'd once trusted, an independent journalist named Willa Brandt, who used to cover prison corruption before getting pushed out of every major paper. He left her a message. I can't give you everything, but I can give you the truth. 6 women, 1 warden, a prison full of ghosts. Call me back before they shut me down. He didn't know if she'd respond, but he knew this much. He wasn't going to stay silent. Not anymore. By the time Willa Brandt returned Mason's call, it was already too late. The department had pulled him from Hawthorne. Official reason? Rotation complete. No further observation needed. Unofficially, Mason knew what it meant. They knew he'd seen too much. They didn't reprimand him, didn't question him, didn't ask for a final report. They just shut the door behind him and locked it from the inside. 2 weeks later, Warden Silas Granger quietly retired. No public announcement, no internal memo, no commendation. One day he was there. The next day, he wasn't. Replaced by a temporary overseer. Files cleaned, cameras reinstalled. No charges, no inquiry, no accountability. As if none of it had happened. But it had happened. Mason knew. So did 6 women, each now in various stages of pregnancy. Each now transferred, reassigned, or given medical leave. Some accepted promotions in distant counties. Others simply vanished. Dana Holt moved to Oregon. She never responded to Mason's follow-up email. Reyes resigned quietly and moved closer to her parents in Arizona. Coulter stayed and never spoke a word. Lena Moore gave birth to a baby girl. No father's name on the certificate. She told Mason in a voice message, "I'm calling her Grace because I still want to believe something good can come from all this." And Kendra Maddox? She disappeared entirely. Her voicemail box was full. Her staff locker cleaned out. Her file marked "left without notice." Mason drove out to Wexford twice, asked around, but no one knew or pretended not to. He suspected she had gone somewhere quiet, far from questions, far from echoes. He didn't blame her. The official records show nothing. Not the pregnancies, not the photos, not the ledger. Mason had made copies of everything, hid them in 3 separate locations, just in case. But he knew the truth didn't live in folders. It lived in the silence that remained. In the way guards looked away when asked about Hawthorne. In the way female recruits whispered rumors during academy training. In the way nobody ever spoke the warden's name again. Granger had built a kingdom, and even in exile, that kingdom kept its walls standing. Months passed. Mason returned to Raleigh, took a desk job at a private investigations firm. Nothing special, just enough to stay afloat. Some nights he'd wake up thinking he was still inside Hawthorne, still watching, still trying to understand how power could be so quiet and still crush everything beneath it. He received a postcard once, from Lena. No return address, just a picture of a newborn wrapped in a soft yellow blanket, and 5 words scrawled on the back. "Thank you for believing me." He pinned it on his office wall, that and a black and white photo of Hawthorne Penitentiary. A reminder, not of what was done, but of what was allowed. As for Warden Granger, rumors said he bought a cabin in the Ozarks. Lived alone. No one visited. No one called. Mason wasn't interested in chasing him down. Some stories don't end with justice. Some just end. And what remained behind weren't headlines or court cases, but questions. What is consent when the walls around you say, "love or leave"? What is silence when speaking means losing everything you thought you needed to survive? What is justice when the institution you report to benefits from your silence? Mason gave Willa Brandt everything. The photos, the ledger copies, the statements. She tried to publish it. No outlet took the story. Too risky, too unverifiable, too dangerous to the wrong people. So she started a blog. The Quiet Ward, she called it. The first article was titled, "The Warden Who Fathered 6 Children and Left Through the Front Door." It went viral in underground forums, Reddit, dark corners of the internet. Whistleblower circles picked it up. Prison reform activists started quoting it. But no names were ever confirmed. Everything remained just unclear enough to be denied. And that was the cruelest sentence of all. Everyone knew, but no one could prove. Because the system had erased the fingerprints before anyone saw the blood. Still, in the months and years that followed, whispers grew louder. Other prisons were audited. A few wardens were quietly moved. Policy revisions appeared about staff fraternization and psychological evaluations. Mandatory camera zones were expanded, but no official agency ever cited why. No one mentioned Hawthorne. But Mason knew. So did the 6 women. So did the children. One night, years later, Mason returned to Wexford one last time. He parked near the old road that curved past the outer fence of the prison. It was snowing lightly. He stepped out of the car, alone, and looked at the pale gray buildings rising in the distance. Silent, still, haunted. From the rear window of his car, he took out a sealed envelope. Inside, a full copy of the ledger, the photo prints, and a letter addressed only to one person. To the child who one day asks why their father's name isn't written down. He placed the envelope inside a small wooden box and buried it at the base of the only pine tree near the road. Covered it with stone, marked it with nothing. And as he stood there, breathing cold air, his hands numb, Mason whispered to the night, "You deserved better." The warden never went to prison. The children never got answers. The mothers carried both the weight and the silence. But somewhere, deep in an archive, no one dares open. There's a file that doesn't exist. And in it, written in pencil, are 6 names. 6 women. 6 lives forever changed. And one man who finally decided to speak.